an introduction, that is, you know, well, let's just go home because there's no way I can live up to this. So we'll just end it there on a high note. No, I really want to thank Dean DeLeo and my friend Jeff Sartain for making it possible to come here. I got in a couple of days ago, flew into Austin from Chicago, and it was 5 below zero there. And of course, I had on all my winter gear and my wool coat, my hat and scarves and the things, and standing out there waiting for a taxi for 15 minutes, 30-mile-an-hour winds, cursing Chicago, why am I living here? And then of course I get into Austin, it's like 80 degrees hotter, and everybody's looking at me like some weirdo, and I'm like, I don't know, man, I'm so mixed up. But it doesn't take me long to readjust to being back home, and I still consider this state and this area my home. I can't get away from it. It is the very soul of what I write, and it is where most of the stuff that works inside my head comes from. And so to come back here and to be in front of you is a real privilege. And so thank you for being here. You know, I saw this beautiful poster by Veronica Gonzalez, and I was talking a little bit earlier, and I just told her what a striking piece of art this is, and I just really love it. And I saw that, and I thought, well, now I hadn't planned to read from Day of the Dead, but I saw it, and I said, well, I've got to do something with Day of the Dead now. So I changed the program around a little bit. I'll read just the very first couple of pages, and it's actually maybe some food for thought. It's called Invocation. As Jeff mentioned, it's a story about a man who goes out in search of the murders of his wife during the year of 1913, which is a very instrumental year during the Mexican Revolution. But this is just the beginning of the book, and it's called Invocation. Invocation. It is said by the old ones that without human blood, the sun would cease to give life, that sacrifice fuels Coatlicue, the embodiment of the cosmos. Coatlicue thrives on death and the struggle of oppositions most perfectly expressed in war. Only through its waging can existence be prolonged. I, Berto Morales, in the midst of war, in the midst of terrible loss and death, have given myself to this dictate of the cosmos. One night, a year ago, I found myself standing in deep woods, a paralytic, unable to step forward. In the dark, the stars blanketed by black clouds. I listened. For what? A sound, any sound. Cricket in darkened longing, a creature scuttling for protective brush, a coyote howling for unseen comfort. To be alive, to hear life, and it came to me slowly, deeply, the beat of my heart. My heart is full of hatred, inhabited by the black twin. I've cultivated it, fed it as a freezing man might feed a dying fire, watching for signs of dimming embers, always at the ready to stir them up, to pile on fresh, dry wood as I rub my cold hands over the warmth upon which I know life depends. The 9 levels of Mictlan are to be traversed by the spirits of los muertos, wandering through each underworld, each deeper than the last, the fleshless made to undergo a series of trials for 4 years before rest can be earned. The black twin, the red twin, are said to have battled through these levels in order to bring redemption. My curse is that the red twin, love, has bled to death in my soul, and peace has died with it. It is said that only the warrior dying in glorious battle can move directly to the 4th heaven. And so I have dedicated myself to this. My only hope of redemption, La Calle Roja, the bloody road. And if this slim hope of salvation is but a chimera, a brutal and faithless dream, I will have lost nothing, because there is nothing left to lose in this charred heart. And it's an interesting sort of segue, in a sense, because one of the stories I had planned to read today just came out in a journal that just began called So It Goes, and it is a journal dedicated, or that comes out, is published by the Kurt Vonnegut Memorial Museum in Indianapolis, and I was lucky enough to be one of the final people, if not the final person, to interview Kurt Vonnegut before he passed away, and got to spend a couple of days with him, and it was a real treat because he was the guy that made me want to be a writer, and to be able to spend the time with him and to find out that that he was in fact an incredibly generous person was an extra treat, because you're always afraid of meeting your heroes and you go, oh, please don't be a jerk, and he wasn't. He was an incredibly generous person. And so when they approached me and they said, well, would you write a story for this inaugural issue of So It Goes? And I said, sure. And then they told me the topic, and they're like, well, it has to be about war, or something to do with war, because it's going to come out on Veterans Day. And I said, but I've never been in the service. Like, I feel strange about doing that. And they said, well, just try and come up with something. So I said, okay. I have a lot of students, but it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be, because so many of my students are returning veterans. And one in particular whom I've grown quite close to and I count as a friend now, he and I have spent a lot of time together, and so this is a kind of, in some ways, this is kind of in dedication to my friend Keith. It's called Extraction Point. Thing was, I was tired of going back and forth with Rose to the damned marriage counselor who wanted to sit there and go over the past, like he wanted us to live in a haunted house forever. And it was always the same thing. The baby had died and we couldn't get pregnant again. That is, I couldn't get Rose pregnant again. Apparently my boys swam the wrong way, in circles, and their tails were too short or their heads too big, or they had two heads. Basically, they were all goofed up. My deformed sperm were only good for causing frequent bad scenes with all-night crying jags, complete with accusations that I wasn't taking my vitamins like I should, or my male fertility yoga DVD seriously. And all of it had me not really caring about getting Rose pregnant, or even about Rose much anymore. And I didn't want to talk about her dead baby, or how he'd been born premature with his lungs too underdeveloped, and how he'd suffocated like a tiny fish gasping on the floor next to a broken fishbowl. The truth was, I wanted to leave Rose because I didn't much love her anymore. She knew it, even though I wouldn't say as much. The only thing that was keeping me around was guilt and the fear that I was as big a bastard as my father. And Rose knew this too. That's why when we fought, she'd always get around saying, you're as big a bastard as your father. She told me that before I left to meet Scotty and Digger in Vegas. Actually, it was the more concise version. You're a real bastard. I didn't say anything. There was a cab waiting, and anyway, she was right. I had wanted out for a good long time since getting back. I'd agreed to the marriage counseling because it was the last stage of the death ritual. I needed a few days in Vegas with my two friends, my only two real friends, war buddies I'd served with in Iraq. They were the only two humans capable of rubbing away the numbness creeping from my tits to my toes. We were all out of the Corps now. I'd gone back to school and finished with a useless English degree. Scotty had a jacked up knee that had been replaced twice after a mortar shell went off in his vicinity and the explosion sent him ass over tea kettle and some weird backflip that had him land on his feet. Only his right knee went all sorts of wrong. He moved around gingerly, like he was always walking on broken glass. He was twice divorced and spent most of his time moving from girl to girl these days. He'd always been a player, but he'd achieved professional grade in the last couple of years. Now Digger was a different story. He would have loved a wife, but no woman in her right mind was going to marry him on account of his being a head case, PTSD, bouts of depression, all that shit. But I loved him. He was a little dude, but he'd been solid in the desert. First time I sized him up, I figured him for shitbird. He proved me wrong. One thing I learned over there was that you can't tell who's going to show up and who isn't just by the looks of them. Don't get me wrong. We were all of us scared stupid, but dudes like Digger got it done when they had to lug a pant load while they did it. Scott and me talked with Digger while Digger showered. Scotty asked me, "You getting divorced?" "I don't know," I said. "Look, either you are or you aren't." "Maybe. I thought you were trying to knock her up again." "It's not working," I said. "Lucky for you." "Yeah, lucky, I guess," I said. "Goddamn right lucky. So what happened with what's-her-face, Kristen?" Digger looks at me. Scotty looked at me. "Same shit that always happens, which is I got bored with the bullshit, too much complaining about me not being serious. Imagine me not being serious. I almost spit my child right in her face when she said that. Serious? You ain't got a clue as to what serious is," I told her. "Does she want to get married?" "She was already married," he says. "That's why I started up with her. Figured it'd be less complicated. It wasn't. Her hubby started following me around, a regular Sherlock fucking Holmes. Came around when I wasn't home." "Good thing you quit her," I tell him. "Nah, she quit me. Told me to jump off a bridge, slapped my chaw right out of my cup. To tell you the truth, I was more pissed about that than the splitting." Digger comes out naked from the shower, his little willy swinging. It's his best trick. "We're going to go spend this VA money on some titties, or are you going to want a dick dance here all night?" "Titties," Scotty said. "Roger that," I said. We got ready, doused ourselves with the same bottle of cologne like we used to when we got Liberty, and went out searching for strange in the bars around Lejeune. The three of us buddied up there. Our unit saw action in Fallujah 1 and 2. We made our way through the casino at the hotel, a dump on the old side of the strip. Out on the street, there was a string of Mexicans standing on the sidewalk, handing out advertisements for strip clubs and private dancers who'd come to your room for $300. "We got a limo that'll take you guys to the high-class place. Top-looking girls, no hags," one of the Mexicans told us. Before I could sneeze, there was a black stretch at the curb. We got in. Scotty had a fresh pint of goose, and we took turns hitting it. By the time we landed at the club, my head was spinning. But the thing was, by the time we got there, I didn't want to go in. But there we were, a smiling asshole holding the door open. Digger hit the ATM machine. He was feeling generous like he always did. He was known for spending his entire wad in one night. We just sat down, and there were already 3 girls on our laps asking us where we were from. They could smell drunk leathernecks through the walls, and Digger nodded at his girl, a hot blonde, till he looked at her close and saw the bloodshot eyes and caked mascara. He smiled at me and Scotty to let us know that the first dance was on him tonight. I didn't much like my girl. She was too pretty, in a way. Too pretty to be a stripper. Not hard enough. She was like a girl you might know in real life, maybe even care about. She said her name was Marissa, and she started to do her thing, but I couldn't even manage chubby. The music was too loud, and I could smell vodka on her breath. She needed to booze up to do her grind. So she did 2 songs and asked me if I wanted another dance. I told her no, but I offered to buy her a drink. She asked for champagne, they always do. I was in no mood to quibble. I bought her a glass and forked over $25. We made chit-chat, her asking me what I was doing in Vegas. I told her I was there for a funeral. After a few minutes, she got the hint and went off to look for the next dance. I ordered another goose. Even though I was pretty loaded, I could smell the girl's perfume when I lifted my glass. Scotty joined me at the bar. We watched Digger. He was dropping a couple of $100 on this one stripper. We'd seen that before. "Digger's not getting any," Scotty said. "No, that's clear," I said. "Better off that way," Scotty said. "This way, you pay, but you don't have to keep paying once you get home." I didn't want to talk about home. Didn't want to talk at all, even. But Scotty was going to make me talk. "You remember how much Garcia loved strippers? Jesus, he went crazy when he found out there weren't going to be any boom boom in the sandbox. The minute we jumped off the Chinook, that guy was jerking off. Garcia met his end at Fallujah 2. After a while, Digger came back. "Where to next? Come on, submission focus here." "Somewhere we can talk about without the girls jumping in our laps," I said. There was no limo to take us back, so we walked, stopping to pick up another pint of goose. While Digger was in the store, Scotty zipped up, and for the hell of it, we threw the empty bottle of vodka at the piss stain. Glass shrapnel went everywhere. It sort of surprised me, because I hadn't seen him chuck it. Digger came out and he poked his head in the alley. "Let's go." "We were remembering Garcia," Scotty told Digger on the way back to the room. We rode the elevator up quiet, except for Scotty saying, "Yup, yup," every 2 seconds. He didn't like silence. Back in the room, Digger stripped to his skivvies and poured out some more vodka. "Remember how that Bradley tore that building up after Garcia? He really had it in for the house. He shot every single round he had on his track. There wasn't shit left. Only there had been. The boy and his mother. The kid was dead, the woman pregnant, still breathing. She looked like a fish gasping for air next to a broken fishbowl. There was no time to medevac her. She was gone in a couple of minutes. I didn't touch her, even though I wanted to do something. Instead, the three of us stared for a minute or two, and then we got on like we were supposed to. I'm going to hit the rack, Digger said. He didn't feel like reliving history anymore. He was probably getting enough therapy at home, or maybe he was just tired. Scotty poured another glass. I nodded when he offered me a refill. You still think about the girl in the house? I asked him. I think about a lot of things, he said. Garcia, for one. But yeah, fuck yeah. So we raised a glass to Garcia. Hey, you're not letting that mindfuck direct your current situation, are you? No, I said, it's just that sometimes I think that if we could have done something for her, if she made it, then things wouldn't be what they are now. Rose ain't dead, Scotty told me. That's right, I said, she ain't dead. Jesus, it wasn't your fault you weren't there when your kid died. Nothing you could do but try to get back with your head still on your shoulders. Poor Garcia and a lot of other good guys couldn't manage it. That's for sure, I said. I wanted another drink, but the bottle was empty again. Being alone isn't the worst thing, Scotty said. But it ain't that hot either, brother. And Rose ain't dead. It'd be nice if you two could work it out, so that it wasn't like permanent blue on blue. Affirmative, I said. So what's your extraction point? Scotty asked me. That's why I'm here. You two are supposed to help me with that. Listen, Scotty said, serious. I can't keep a woman, and Digger over there is convinced he's growing a grapefruit-sized tumor in his head. One thing I can tell you, you're as good a guy as there is, and I'm not even being queer for you. I looked at him and I said, she says I'm a bastard. She's right, Digger said from under his cover. But you know what? We're all bastards now. And I am growing a grapefruit-sized tumor in my head, so fuck off. Look, Scotty said to me, just because you're retreating doesn't mean the war's lost. I got up. I'm going to hunt down another bottle of goose. Want me to come with, Scotty asked. Nah, you're wiped. Hit the rack. We'll get together for chow in the morning. I ended up in the lobby watching the gamblers. Only the diehards were still at it, one fruitless, barren clusterfuck of desperation. I thought about calling Rose, but it was too late. Instead, I got to remembering how she looked when I got to her after the baby had gone. I took a taxi home from the airport. I thought she'd be in bed, but she was waiting for me in the kitchen. She cried when I came through the door. She showed me a picture of the baby. We were going to name him after her father, but she named him after me when he died. She never told me she was angry, but that said it all. I was home for 6 days before I had to go back. It was a relief. And then Fallujah, and the woman dying with the baby in her gut, and God and Sonny Jesus showing me there wasn't a damn thing they or I could do about anything, so don't even pray. But that's the way things were, and there wasn't anything that I learned, seen, or found out that was going to help. I unscrewed the pint of goose, raised the bottle, took a swig while thinking that Rose was right. But Digger was even righter. We were all bastards now. One of the things that I've been working on for quite a while, I've got a novel coming out in the next month or two, and it's called Los Duros. It's based on a part of California that's kind of in the 7 jewel cities of the Coachella Valley area, from Palm Springs to Indio to Cathedral City. Very, very wealthy part of the country. In fact, the highest concentration of multimillionaires in the United States live in that area. Out of, I think, like the 2,200 families that live in that area between Rancho Mirage, Indian Wells, and Palm Springs, something like 1,700 out of 2,100 families there have a net worth of over $5 million. I mean, it's a very wealthy place. 37 country clubs in Rancho Mirage alone, which is, to give you an idea. 37 country clubs. And 2 full polo clubs with polo ponies and the whole thing. And it's, so I have a friend from Indiana University, and Jeff knows him as well. And he was conducting a summer program in this area because along with it being the richest area in California by concentration, it's also the poorest. Because you have a number of migrant workers who come through that area, through the Coachella Valley, picking grapes, strawberries, lettuce, that sort of thing. And you also have a number of these people who are employed in the service industry, restaurants, construction, all these sorts of things in that area. So it's a very weird juxtaposition of incredible wealth that is really so concentrated, you know, and then this kind of poverty that is kind of mind-blowing. And, you know, I didn't grow up rich. I grew up working class on the west side of San Antonio. You know, we got food stamps for a while, and we had our electricity cut off when we didn't have the money to pay. So, yeah, I knew a little bit about poverty. And, you know, my grandparents were both migrant workers, and they told me all the stories about doing this sort of work. And my father used to have to leave school early every year to go out on Los Piscas, and go out there and do his duty for the family. So I knew some of these stories, but so I thought I was sort of prepared for what I was going to see when I got down there. He asked me to go down there and do a writing course for some of these kids. And so he told me, hey man, this isn't really going to blow your mind. It's going to change the way you see the world. And I was like, yeah, right, dude. I mean, you know, it's not going to change my world. You know, I've seen things, you know. But lo and behold, it did. You know, I got there and I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. This one particular school that I was working at, about 95% of the kids that went to school there were migrant children of migrant workers. Many of them, I'd say more than half, undocumented. And the majority of them didn't speak much English. And then within the part of the school group that was Spanish-speaking, some of them didn't even speak Spanish. They spoke Purépecha, which is an indigenous language from there, so they were doubly kind of disjointed. And they lived in these colonias, and Los Duros is the name of one of them. And essentially it's this place where thousands of people live essentially in squalor. There's no electricity, no water, no police protection, no medical, nothing. I mean, they just sort of live there. And on top of that, toxic waste is burned 100 yards from the camp because it's on a Native American reservation, and so there's no control over the burning of these kinds of toxins. And so the local construction people would pay the tribe to allow them to burn this stuff on the land, and so you had kids with all kinds of asthmas and leukemias, and I mean it was just terrible. And so I thought I've got to write about this place. And so this piece here comes from this new novel. And it's really kind of an introductory part to the novel. It's just, I wanted to focus some short pieces, not so much on characters, but on the place itself, because the place is really unique, I think, in that it brings these two sides of America right up on each other, right? So the three short little pieces together are called Mecca, California, in 3 parts. And the first part is called August. Fucking flies. They're disgusting, filthy. Fuck you, flies. I spit when I see them. I cross myself like I learned in church. This is to keep them from invading. They make me sick. I see them in my sleep. They crawl around in my dreams, in my brain. I spend hours every day tracking them, even when I look like I'm asleep. I keep a fly swatter in my hand, always on guard. They come in with the wind. They come to feast on the dead fish floating in the Salton Sea. They come in swarms, infesting the carcasses of dead animals, roadkill mostly. They're drawn by the smell of rotting vegetation. And this morning, the dead dog lying in the dirt street outside the house. No one will come to pick it up. It'll lay there, its sinews and muscle drying in the sun. The flies do their vile dance, planting maggots, making more copies of themselves, and I, unable to clean my mind of them, I feel them digging into my ears, like they dig into the dog carcass, impregnating me with their larvae. If I left them alone, they'd dig into my brain, filling my head with their deafening buzz until they ate their fill, and then they would fly out of my ears and mouth. If I let them. So I dig. At first I used my fingers, but now I use an old wire hanger. I put tape around one of the ends so that it made a handle. I circle the outer ear and then push deep into the canal. I do it until I bleed, until the skin crusts with blood. That's what it takes. The teacher notices my ears. She sends me to the nurse, who sends a note home because there are no phones in Los Duros. But I throw it away. What does she know? She doesn't know about the flies. She is blind and deaf. She doesn't see them for what they are, for what they bring. I pass the dog in the evening. His insides have burst. It crawls with maggots. No one has moved it. I want to bury it, only I don't want to get too close. But tonight I can no longer deny what I smell. I smell the maggots. I hear them crawling and tunneling into the rot. I hear the buzzing outside in the wind. I can't bear it anymore, and so I walk out into the street. The moon is full, and I can see its outline in the pale light. I go to it and drop to my knees, and with my hands, I begin to dig in the sand. I stop to spit every few seconds. I cross myself. Fucking flies, I say out loud. And I dig and dig until a hole big enough for the carcass is ready. And then I stand and kick it towards the hole. Its body is soft, and the blows sound wet and mushy. It comes apart, and the flies, goddamn them, circle furiously. I put my fingers into my ears. They won't get in. It drops into the shallow grave in pieces. And then I kick in the sand I've piled beside the hole. I keep kicking until a mound has formed. Only a few steps away, I force myself to throw up by sticking my fingers down my throat. My eyes tear up, and I cross myself again. Inside the house, there's no running water, and so I douse my head in the pail. Warm streams run down my face and neck, and I scrub the skin to make sure I'm not carrying the sickness. I lay down in my bed and take out my hanger. I'll dig them out. I'll pierce the maggots in my brain. They're still out there. They're in here. I cross myself and spit. The Salton Sea. Every year, in late summer, the fish bobbed to the surface. Thousands of them, mostly tilapia, pale green and gray, rotting in the sun. Agustin, Augie to his friends, got to feeling sick when this happened. He couldn't fathom how the others could get used to the stench. His father, Agustin Sr., was an old-school Mexican from Guadalajara who once crossed the border to El Paso just a few weeks after splitting his foot with an axe. He went around with his usual silence if the smell wasn't even perceptible. He didn't complain, and he didn't like his children to complain, especially his only son, Augie. The problem was that Augie couldn't stop complaining. He was a complainer by nature. For him, injustice was injustice, whether it came in the form of God's unbearable heat, which to him only confirmed God's hatred for him and his family, or whether it was a slight given a friend from someone in authority. He just wouldn't stand for it. Once, when his teacher had slammed his friend Raul's head into the chalkboard because he couldn't diagram a sentence, Augie found the woman's car in the parking lot of a Safeway, and he relieved himself on the cloth seats till they were soaked in his dark yellow piss. He didn't tell Raul that he'd righted the wrong, but whenever he saw the teacher in the hallway, he knew that she could still smell it. The proof was in her eyes, the way she looked at all the brown students with her evil suspicion. Now, the Salton Sea is the largest body of water in California. From the Orocopia Mountains, you can see the polluted New River emptying into the lake, the silent brown mountains surrounding the low saline sea, making a beautiful sight. But you couldn't go down there. It was forbidden. It was the most polluted body of water in the United States, brimming with pesticides, chemicals from construction sites, and other poisons that had infested the water since anyone could remember. But at least you could look at it. This was something that Augie enjoyed doing when he could get away on his own. His parents lived in Mecca in a small house with a yard that, because it was carefully tended, made the small shack look all the more shabby and dilapidated. But as small as the house was, Agustin Sr. prided himself on welcoming relatives who were moving through the Coachella Valley following the grapes. Chano, a cousin Augie's age, was living with him that summer, and he was curious about the fish kill. It wasn't enough to smell it. He wanted to see it. Augie warned him, "It'll make you want to throw up." But he agreed to take him as close as the small hills that overlooked the western part of the lake. They set off in the morning because the smell wouldn't be as strong. By noon, it would be overpowering. So the two boys rode their bikes down the farm roads that took them towards the wrinkled mountains overlooking the Salton Sea. "We're getting closer. Puta madre," his cousin cursed. "It does smell bad." They stood above the sea almost a mile away. But even though the smell was potent and disgusting, Chano wanted to see the dead fish. "Not even the dogs go down there," Augie tried to argue, but his cousin was determined to get closer. So they rode down the trail, turning into the winding dirt road that led to the water. As they got closer, Augie fought the urge to gag, his throat getting tighter and his eyes watering. The wind blew the stench right into their faces, mixing with the dry desert dust so that the boys had dirt tracks running down their eyes to their chins and ears. It was as if their faces were being transformed into dusty hills. Augie breathed out of his mouth, fighting hard to keep from letting the smell enter his nostrils. The heat and dust combined to coat his tongue, and still the fetid air coated his throat and lungs, making its way down his stomach into his intestines, or so he felt. He was being polluted, and he feared that now that the smell had invaded his body, that he would be unable to get rid of it. The two boys rode side by side, approaching slowly. About 100 yards from the lake, the fish became clear in the glaring sunlight. There were thousands and thousands floating in a gray mass that, as the boys approached even closer, seemed to make up the entire contents of the Salton Sea itself. It was a plague, something that only a biblical pharaoh deserved, a curse like weeping sores or the death of all unanointed firstborns. Chano finally gave in to the smell and, dropping to his knees, vomited a dozen feet from the side of the lake. "Okay," he said, puke now mixing with the dust in the corners of his mouth. You're right, let's get out of here." And he turned to walk towards the bikes. They laid a few dozen feet away. But now Augie wanted to get closer. He wanted to walk right up to the water, to look into the thousands of decaying eyes, to look right into the death and pollution that he had until then only smelled. Chano watched him silently from 100 feet away. Augie was determined to keep his stomach, to walk to the edge and demand something. But it was only a half-born thought, more of an inarticulate hope born in the act of defiance. The fish bobbed on their sides, their bloated bodies and eyes bursting in the furious heat. Augie's eyes watered, and breathing through his mouth, he felt himself begin to heave. But he hadn't eaten that morning, and nothing came up except for a long stream of yellow saliva. Bending over, his hands on his knees, Augie noticed that there were more than dead fish in the Salton Sea. There were scores of dead birds, grebes and pelicans who had eaten the rotting flesh and died as well. He seemed to be the only living thing on the shore. He imagined a huge fish net dropping from the blue sky and clearing the filth from the water. But he knew that even this miracle wouldn't have cleaned anything. Here, death and contamination prevented the miraculous. It was only beautiful when viewed from far, far away, from the safety of the high hills. He turned and walked back to his cousin. Chano sat on his bike, his face half covered by his t-shirt, impatiently holding Augie's bike. "Let's get the hell out of here already," he told him. A few days later, Chano's family had left to go north. But wash as he might, Augie still couldn't get the taste and smell of the dead fish out of his mouth. When school started again a week later, he made his way to his new classroom. It was hot, 120 degrees, and the air conditioner wasn't working well. Inside the classroom, his fellow students sat motionless, staring listlessly in the heat, the salt of their sweat perched above their lips in minuscule bubbles. At the desk was a teacher who'd thrown his friend against the chalkboard, and it seemed to Augie that they were all of them floating on the surface of something immense, something bottomless, something not even distance could make beautiful. Thank you. So the final third of the story of this little tripart piece is called SH, which stands for State Highway 111. He always thought of her when he drove past the windmills. White towers of powerful blades turning serenely in the desert heat, hundreds, maybe thousands, so many that it looked as if the sun-baked mountains on which they sat would one day fly off into the spotless blue sky. He always thought this. As a young child, he'd imagined that on those searing white days that it might be possible for the land to take flight. And if he were vigilant enough, for him and his mother to be on the spot when it happened. She'd been pleased by this idea when he mentioned it to her on a trip they took to Los Angeles for the funeral of a distant cousin. She told the child that his cousin was in heaven and that God had taken her there. He'd asked how God took people to heaven, and she told him that the Spirit flew on white wings right through the top of that blue sky. They'd been driving through the Windmill Highway, and he believed it. And watching out the window, he told her that someday the land would fly to God as well. She liked that, he remembered. And so when he drove past the windmills, he thought of his dead mother. One night, she just didn't come home from work. He didn't notice until the morning when she usually woke him for school. He didn't like school, and she encouraged him by waking him gently and putting his socks on for him. Then she'd make him breakfast. But that morning, he'd awoken to find that she was gone. He'd been more puzzled than worried. He was used to the unusual. Nothing ever went the way it should in Los Duros. It'd been that way since he was born. So he dressed himself, walked to the bus stop. He'd even fixed himself something to eat. There was no phone, no real address for them to notify him at home, so they came to the school. The principal called him out of class, and as soon as he saw the police, he knew it was bad. The police never brought anything good. They told the boy that his mother had been killed by a drunk driver on her way home from work, one of the casinos, a drunken gambler driving the wrong way on the street. After, the principal made some calls and then drove him home. The boy hid when child services came knocking. A few neighbors brought food and condolences. He needed neither. He took care of himself. He knew how to work, how to survive. He quit dreaming. That was the key. He told himself this every day. It was for the weak, it was for the soft. Memories are for suckers. So he closed off her room and commanded himself to stop thinking about her. Except for when he passed the windmills. He couldn't help it, and there was no way to look past the thousands of lazily spinning fans. It was as close as he got to praying for her soul, as close as he ever allowed himself to dream. He imagines that the rain that came after the accident washed the blood off the highway into the sands. And he knows that somehow the whole of it, death, love, sadness, pain, loss, is there, tethered to those mountains, the deadly road, the towering windmills, which will never take flight towards the indifferent sun. Thank you. If there are any questions, we've got a couple of 3 minutes. If anyone has anything, yes, sir.
I finished Drift last night.
Thank you.
And I told my wife, I said, you know, and I don't mean this as a derogatory comment, certainly not.
No.
If you were to remove all the F words and the combinations of the F words, it would be 20 pages shorter.
Maybe 40.
But having said that, if that were done, this book would be far less powerful, the character would be far less believable. You know, you hear the expression, oh, that movie kept me on the edge of my seat. Mm-hmm. This book kept me on the edge of my seat. Wow. Very well done.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So makes my heart feel good. You know, I had an old professor of mine who I sent the book to, and he wrote it. He called me up and he said, you know, I liked the book, but it was really hard to read. He goes, the language is so, you know, it's so terrible. And he said, but I suddenly, about halfway through, I figured out what was going on. He goes, the language has to be violent because this kid's going through something violent, and that's kind of his weapon, the only real weapon he has to confront all this sort of chaos and confusion. And it's kind of I had a incensed father write me a letter last year, I think, and I'm not, you know, he had some good points, I guess. He was like, this is a filthy book and it stinks and you're a filthy person. So, you know, 2 out of 3. So, and so I wrote him back and I said, he's told me I always check my daughter's books when she brings them home, and I open the page up randomly and I read it, and if I don't like what I'm reading, I don't let her read the book. And so I opened it up and there was the F word like 15 times and you're a menace and that sort of thing. So I wrote him back a letter and I said, listen, I totally appreciate the fact that you don't want your daughter reading this book and you think it's too grown up for her at this point or whatever. I said, but you know, I get hundreds of letters from kids between the ages of 13 and 18, some of them admitting some of the most dark, depressing secrets to me because they can't talk to anybody else in their lives. I mean, I had a kid from Kansas, of all places, just write me about 6 months ago saying, I think I'm gay and I'm thinking about killing myself. And, you know, I didn't know what to do with that. And he was like, you're the only person I think I can tell about this. And so I wrote him back, you know, with some numbers and you should get into contact. You know. But, you know, it made me think about them. I thought there's so many kids out there. And that's what I told this father, you know, like there's so many, you don't really know what if you can't be frank and discuss and even let her read this book, like, you really don't know what kids are facing now. You know, if you can't open up that dialogue. So yeah, you know, there's a lot of rough stuff in there, but I didn't want to flinch at it. But thank you for that comment. That's really nice of you. Thank you. I know we've got a film class starting.
What was the year that you were in California?
Let's see, I went 3 years in a row, 2006, 7, 8, and then I started doing it in Indianapolis because my friend began this, it's called the Chicano Youth Academy. We have so many migrant workers coming from the Midwest now that he was able to start doing it right there in Indianapolis. And so living in Columbus, I go out there in the summer and spend it. He does it, he runs it the whole summer long. It's an incredible program because rather than having people write essays, he starts them out by having them do digital shorts about where they live and start to think about narrative, and they're much more comfortable using visuals, and then so we get them from that point to the point where we start to have them write about it, and so they begin, and we sent one student to USC last year and another one to NYU's film school last year, and some of these kids are now coming back after they graduated from college and now coming back as mentors themselves. It's just really a really cool thing to see with kids that I think a lot of people sort of just dismiss as hopeless or, you know.
I was hoping you were going to say it was a long, long time ago.
No, it's not. It's ongoing. It's out there. It's out there. We just don't see much of it. Thank you. Thank you again.